Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Glyn Taylor in Missing the Missing episode number 3. Glyn Taylor was a 21-year-old young man who disappeared from the UK back in 2001. He was born on the 17th of November 1979 to parents Susan and a biological father who were both only children, so he didn't have any cousins growing up. Glyn's father was in the Royal Air Force, and after Glyn's birth was posted over to Germany, where in 1982 Glyn's sister Danielle would be born. A while later the family would relocate back to the UK to Cambridgeshire and Weston-super-Mare due to postings in the RAF of his father. And when Glyn was 8 years old, his father and mother Susan would separate, and Susan would later go on to marry Phil, his stepdad, who would later become a permanent fixture within the household. The family would then relocate to Lincolnshire in the UK. As children, Danielle has some wonderful memories of Glyn, including spending a lot of time together in Cheddar Gorge and running through cornfields where the corn was actually taller than they were. So they're just some really nice memories that she has. Her nickname for Glyn as children was Glinny. And Glyn went to Boston Grammar School. School was never a problem for Glyn, and he was described as having a very good group of friends, which would become very evident later on. He is described as a white male. He's about 6 foot to 6 foot 2 inches tall, with a slim build and a slim face, and, quote, piercing blue eyes. He had short, mousy brown hair at the time when he disappeared, but he was known to previously have worn that in longer styles. Glyn had a condition called sickle cell anemia, which had resulted in him being hospitalised throughout his childhood and school years in Ely Hospital in Cambridgeshire and also in Peterborough, but this was described not to have had a significant impact on his quality of life. Glyn went on to Loughborough University, where he would study physics, and he had completed his first year of university prior to disappearing. But his sister said that he didn't like maths, which is a significant part of the studying of physics, instead noting that he absolutely loved and adored music. Glyn played the acoustic guitar and taught his sister how to sing and play the guitar. He loved Eric Clapton and Bob Dylan, with his favourite song being Tears in Heaven, and the first album he bought for his sister being Elton John's Candle in the Wind. He'd been working during the break from university to save up a bit of money, and his sister did note that he'd started feeling a little bit down prior to his disappearance due to the family dynamic at the time, but outside of that there was nothing noted by way of anything out of the ordinary in his personality or routine prior to his disappearance. Danielle had moved out of the family home to London, and she noted that when she moved out, her brother Glyn gave her a really big hug and just told her how much he loved her. There were no changes noted to his personal, academic or social life, and his mother stated that the family never had any trouble from Glyn. His friend Michaela Ives met Glyn on the RAF Wittering base, where they both lived with their families, when he was about 11 or 12 years old, and she said that he used to play music, and she has resounding memories of listening to him play guitar and singing. Michaela's dad, Chris Bell, he set up a youth club on the base and helped to teach Glyn electronics and guitar. His disappearance is noted by everybody who knew him, family and friends, as being very out of character, with Susan, his mother, noting that he would always keep in touch with her, even when he was off at university, at least by calling her. Very little is known about the details of Glyn's actual disappearance, other than the fact that he was 21 years old when he was last seen, and the details of that very last day are scarce, but what is known is that on Wednesday, July 11th, 2001, while on a trip home from Loughborough University during the holidays, Glyn's car had broken down in the Quadring Bank area of Lincolnshire. It hasn't been publicly released what he'd been doing that day or what his plans were. The general consensus appears to be that he was actually travelling home to visit his family during the university holidays, but I'm not sure. He might have been home a little bit prior to that and been working for a couple of days. The details are just so scarce, and I have tried to find out that information, but unfortunately I can't get any solid answer on that. The last known sighting of Glyn was at 3:30 on that afternoon, when he was seen wearing a beige fleece and walking along either Quadring Bank Road or a road in that very near vicinity, back towards his mother's home in Donington, where he would have been staying during the university holidays. It's not noted who this last sighting was by, which I'm a little bit confused about, but it's not noted, unfortunately. The next day, when Glyn hadn't returned home, his mother Susan reported him as a missing person. I'm going to show you a Google map of the area now, just so you can see what we're talking about. I've read and heard different things as to where the final sighting took place, and as I've said, I don't really know by who. Sources agree, though, that it was either along or in the vicinity of Quadring Bank, which is highlighted in red on the map. This is a very, very long road and relatively out in the middle of nowhere, basically. He was said to have walked from his car, which had broken down, from the direction of the river to his mother's home. I've tried to find out where this home was, but unfortunately haven't been successful. So it could have been in any direction, and I don't know how long the walk would have been. But there are only 2 points on this road where it could be described that there was a river. These I've highlighted in black on the map, but either way, both directions end up following the same path. If we switch over to a satellite view, we can get a better picture of what the surrounding area is like. As we can see, it's surrounded by fields, and there's not a lot of signs of life in the vicinity, posing just yet more questions as to where he could have gone. The road goes on for a very long time if you're on foot, and the scenery barely changes, which begs the question, did he end up getting a lift? But we'll discuss that possibility later on. There are some residential properties dotted about along this road, but they are few and far between. I'm assuming the sighting came either from one of the residents or potentially someone who was driving in the area at the time. Police found Glyn's blue Seat Ibiza car in Quadring Bank. Again, no further details as to where precisely this was located, but the car was secured with nothing out of the ordinary standing out, no signs of a struggle. It's simply broken down, and Glyn had made off on foot. If we go back to the map and have a look at the street view, we can see the inception of Quadring Bank, where it does look like there is space enough to pull over a car. But let's just bear in mind that these images are from various points between the years of 2009 to 17. However, I do doubt that things looked that much different back in 01. I believe that this is where the vehicle was likely found, due to the fact that the road itself appears to be a country road with a narrow laneway, and generally not enough space to safely leave a car, unless you were to leave it, I suppose, on the grass verge, which is available in some places along the road. However, that's just my personal take, and I don't know that for certain. Again, these images just show how isolated the area would be for someone travelling on foot. A dog search of the area was carried out, with leaflets issued in the local area and posters being distributed appealing for information, but unfortunately no leads were solicited. Financial investigation revealed that Glyn had a Barclays bank account with about £700 in there, which hasn't been touched since his disappearance. He wasn't known to be making any large withdrawals prior to his disappearance either, and he wasn't known to have been carrying any money with him on the day that he vanished. So what financial means he had to support himself is anybody's guess. Police have also said this year that they've tried everything to find him. As technology has developed, they've started using new techniques that were unavailable back in 01 to find out what happened, including using drones. But unfortunately, no details have been released as to, or at least I couldn't find any recently, as to specific areas that have been searched as part of the investigation. I assume it is the fields and surrounding lands outside of that road, but again, that's just what my assumption would be. On a sensitive note, police obviously have to pursue all lines of inquiry during the investigation, and as part of that, they did locate Glyn and Danielle's biological father, who, as we know, hadn't been in Glyn's life since he was 8 years old. He did claim at that time to have known about Glyn's disappearance or have been made aware by some means, but that, quote, "he's not been knocking on my door," which I think is very distasteful, and so that's all we're going to talk about there. There was no mention of a mobile phone or any mobile phone analysis, but this was back in 2001, and as such, the use of mobile phones was really, really less common, so that doesn't surprise me. Unfortunately, between Glyn's disappearance back in 2001 and now, there's been very, very little in the way of any developments, with the majority of these happening back in 2001. Glyn's disappearance did make front page news on July 19th, 2001 in the local newspaper, the Spalding Guardian, where Glyn's mum, Susan, made a very emotional and desperate appeal for him to get in touch, saying that the whole family was worried about him. Understandably so. In November of that same year, as part of a national missing persons appeal, Glyn's picture was one of those selected to be printed on milk cartons up and down the country in a bid to raise awareness and obtain information, but unfortunately this was also to no avail. Also that year, his mother Susan made a further emotional appeal on the BBC's Crime Watch Daily programme to try and elicit further tips, but again, unfortunately, this also led nowhere. Renewed interest was directed at the case just earlier this year in March 2019, when a childhood friend of Glyn's called Michaela Ives, who we've previously mentioned, made a fresh appeal for information and again landed front page news. As with any traumatic event, people have very different coping mechanisms, and I've heard that Susan, Glyn's mum, really doesn't like to talk about the incident. Due to this, I did struggle with whether or not to actually do this video, but ultimately I did feel that at the end of the day, there's a very big difference between not wanting to talk about it and not wanting to raise awareness of it. They are not one and the same thing. And with so many people still looking for Glyn, still no answers, his sister Danielle really keen to engage in need of answers, I don't see much media coverage at all, unfortunately, and that makes it, in my opinion, all the more important to cover it. And so that's why at the end of the day I did decide to do the video, and I hope I do manage to add a little bit of value here. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the impact of Glyn's disappearance was highlighted when I was talking to his sister Danielle. Danielle openly said that she's constantly in a stalemate or a sense of limbo. Now, she's done really well for herself. She's got a really great job. She works with the public a lot, and due to this, she's a really good speaker. But she does say that people often ask her, you know, as part of general conversation, do you have any brothers or sisters? Now, I'm sure you'll agree this is a very innocent question, typical question, one that the majority of us wouldn't even bat an eyelid if we were asked. But Danielle says that she never knows what to say. She's torn. I mean, obviously, she doesn't want to deny her brother's existence. She has a brother, his name is Glyn, and he's missing, and that is very, very important. But what she says is that when she tells people that she has a brother, but that she's either lost him or however she phrases that, people's attitudes towards her change, and so she doesn't like talking about it. She doesn't know what to say, and she can appreciate that other people don't know what to say either. Now, I can personally relate to the other side of this. I didn't know whether or not it was the right thing to do to reach out and try to speak to Danielle about Glyn's disappearance. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how it would be received. But at the end of the day, I thought, you know, how can I reopen a wound that hasn't had a chance to heal? I mean, there are no answers. There is no closure. So that wound is going to still be open. So ultimately, I did reach out to Danielle, and she gave me a call, in fact, on her birthday. And she was very appreciative to know that obviously Glyn hasn't been forgotten and there are still people fighting for answers in his case. So just on a side note, happy birthday, Danielle, keep smiling. As part of this conversation, Danielle was adamant to explain how Glyn's disappearance has impacted every single aspect of her life. One example she gave, which I think just really, really highlights the impact, is that Danielle's noticed a significance of numbers since he disappeared. Glyn disappeared on the 11th of July. His birthday is November 17th, so the numbers 7 and 1, they keep coming up, and every time they do, it just reminds her more and more of the fact that, you know, Glyn is missing and they have no answers. One example she gave, and, you know, I couldn't fathom it. I mean, imagine going to open a bank account or getting a new bank card and noticing the numbers 1 and 7 in that. I mean, like I've said before, none of the rest of us would even bat an eyelid on that. We wouldn't consider that anything out of the ordinary. But imagine living a life constantly being reminded of the fact that your sibling is missing and you have no answers for him. And this just shows on the most basic level how somebody's day-to-day, really ordinary activities can be so severely impacted by the disappearance of a loved one. Personally, I like to think of this as a synchronistic way of reinforcing Glyn's presence all around. You know, whether physically we can see him or not, whether we know where he is, he's still around there with his sister all the time. But that is easy for me to say when I'm not facing the daily challenges of not knowing where my loved one is. Michaela, who we've already discussed, Michaela Ives, one of Glyn's childhood friends, she's mentioned, quote, "I pray that he is safe. He's got to be somewhere. I wish I knew. It breaks my heart when I think about him. He was so young. It just baffles me what happened to him. It's like he vanished into thin air. It's totally bizarre and out of character." She continues, "When I first heard that he'd gone missing, I was shocked. I'd seen him a few months before it happened when he'd come to visit me and my mum and dad. Quite soon after I heard he'd gone missing, I was distraught." And that just gives you a bit of an idea. It's not only the family that are impacted by this, it's other friends in the wider social circle as well who all need answers. So when it comes to what happened to Glyn and any thoughts, as usual, we have to consider the possibility that potentially he could have left of his own accord. He was an adult at the time. He had been noted as not being altogether happy at home. You know, maybe the impact of coming back from being in student accommodation, maybe that had felt smothering to him. He wasn't pursuing something at university that he was passionate about. So these are all things that lead us to believe that there was a chance that he could have decided to make off and start a new life elsewhere. But as usual, I have to maintain that if you are going to disappear, you would use every means at your disposal, and he was known to have left £700 in his bank account untouched. On the days when Danielle does not want to think about the darker possibilities, this is what she holds on to. This scenario gives the hope that he is safe, well, happy, potentially has his own family. However, Danielle has noted similarities between Glyn's disappearance, or at least his personality, and features of other missing people. For example, in the case that we've just covered about Andrew Gosden, his personality was such that Danielle says there was no way he could put his family through the pain of not knowing where he was. He was described as being incapable of hurting his family. There's nothing wrong with upping and leaving one day, you know, saying you're fed up, you need to go and pursue something else to make you happy. But it is common courtesy and respect to let those around you know what you're doing so that they too can go on with their lives and not have to spend all this time in limbo worrying about you. But that being said, however, if somebody is suffering with various conditions, they're depressed, they're not in the right frame of mind when they do take this form of action, it's obviously possible that when they do come around, feelings of guilt would keep them away, would keep them from making contact, a fear of judgment. And I just think it's really important to point out here that if that is the case, family and friends have pointed out that as long as he's safe and happy, they're just happy to find out. They're just happy to hear from him. There would be no judgment, no trouble. They're all just waiting for that call so they can stop worrying and go on with their own lives. Michaela, again, same friend as we've been mentioning throughout the episode, she posed the possibility that obviously Glyn may have his own family by now, might be married, might have children, but his mom says there was really no reason for him to disappear, and Danielle states that he would never voluntarily miss one of her birthdays. So the second umbrella theory is that Glyn has, under whatever circumstances, come to some form of foul play. He's come to some form of harm. Depending where he was going, what direction, he maybe could have called in at one of the local houses en route if he was tired, if he maybe wanted to use a phone. We have discussed the limited use of mobile phones available back then. Maybe something went wrong there quite by accident. There's limited possibilities as to what they would reasonably be, but they do exist definitely, and in lieu of anything more solid, we do have to consider these theories. It has been suggested that perhaps Glyn was abducted by a criminal gang. I'm not sure personally where this theory has come from, but who am I to judge it? We've got, as I've just said, no solid leads, so we definitely need to explore all avenues of inquiry. It's not uncommon for young people, young lads in particular, to be exploited by criminal gangs and used basically to sell, for example, drugs in different parts of the country. However, Glyn doesn't fit the typical victim profile. He's a little bit older. Usually these other lads are younger teens. Glyn appears to be from a stable family home and is close to his family, and that's very atypical of this kind of situation. On the darker days, Danielle believes that Glyn could have potentially thumbed for a lift and something had gone horribly wrong. Everyone in Glyn's social circle, friends, family, they've all been accounted for, their actions have been accounted for. So if this scenario occurred, it would have had to have been a stranger. Now, it's not unheard of for things to go wrong in a vehicle, and hitchhiking is renowned for being dangerous. But I suppose, one of the key motives might have been some form of robbery, maybe, in which case the perpetrator would have been really disappointed, and just at such a high cost, it really doesn't bear thinking about. I personally believe there's probably really good potential for, despite the time of day, for Glyn to have been involved in a vehicular accident, maybe a hit and run, except maybe the perpetrators ran off with Glyn instead of facing up to the consequences. It was a very narrow country lane. There's no street lights, and even though it was daylight and it was summer, in some of those areas there's trees lining the roads. It's very narrow, and it's a national speed limit is 60 miles an hour. So if you're going at 60 and you round a bend and there's somebody walking down the road where, let's add that there is no pavement, that is a recipe for disaster. So that's a serious possibility, and maybe somebody decided to remove all evidence. However, I do think that during the police investigation, evidence of this would have been found. Even if you don't see somebody coming beforehand, you would brake after the fact, and you'd probably leave some form of brake marks on the road or some form of other evidence and damage, and presumably the police didn't find any of this, so not sure where to go with that one. There aren't many rays of light in this case, unfortunately, but I do want to touch on a couple. On the 13th of March this year, 2019, Michaela Ives, again, one of Glyn's childhood friends, she made a fresh appeal, as we've touched on, for information about Glyn's disappearance. This made front news of the local newspaper, and while I think this is absolutely phenomenal and a really good noble deed, I do firmly believe that this picture on the front page of that newspaper should have been of Glyn and not of Michaela. But, hopefully some positive exposure was raised for the case, and maybe it will lead somewhere, who knows? Michaela also runs a Facebook group called Missing Glyn Taylor, Spalding, Lincolnshire, which is regularly updated. On the group, it's mentioned that one of Glyn's old friends has a tape of him from school. Music and the medium of sound is such a fantastic and powerful medium. It does let memories carry on even when the individual is no longer there to be able to make any new ones. I mean, just look at all the idols that we look up to and how, for example, their songs, they're as popular now in their wake as they were when they were first released. And another classic example of just how powerful music is. If, there is a person suffering with dementia, oftentimes their ability to speak is affected in quite a severe way, but they can still, despite not being able to speak or communicate through voice accurately, they can communicate through music and song very, very clearly. And not to mention, it must just be absolutely fabulous to hear his voice again after all this length of time. It is difficult to keep the hope alive, and having something like that is just absolutely fabulous. On the same Facebook group, there are a group of Glyn's friends, which we touched on earlier on, a really good group, many of whom still post messages both to and about Glyn, sharing not only stories and photographs, but also the yearning to see him or hear from him again, and the hope that he is safe and well, leading a really happy life somewhere. So again, to reiterate Glyn's description, he is about 6 foot 6'2" tall, slim with a slim face, and, quote, the most piercing blue eyes that you can imagine. His hair was short and mousy brown at the time, though he had been known to wear it in longer styles previously, and he was a white male. Detective Superintendent John McAdam, who was the head of the Protecting Vulnerable Persons Unit for Lincolnshire Police, says, quote, Police have no idea what happened to him or where he is. That's reassuring. But they say that they review the case on a yearly basis, which I don't think is anywhere near as frequent enough. But again, there has been significant investigation over the years, and we remain committed to finding the truth behind what has happened to Glyn since his disappearance. Continued quote, "This will continue to be an extremely difficult time for his family and friends, and Lincolnshire Police remain committed to investigating any new information. I would encourage anyone who has information they haven't told us to get in touch. Our inquiry remains open and will do so until we find Glyn." However, I've searched the Lincolnshire Police's website to get some firmer information about Glyn, about the investigation, lines of inquiry that was undertaken, details of the search, anything that really could have added value to this case. And as you'll see here, I'm shocked that Glyn is not mentioned on their missing persons page. I know that the case is nearly 20 years old, but the fact of the matter remains that somebody is missing, his whereabouts and well-being are unaccounted for, and there is potential for a foul play scenario here, and in that case somebody needs to be brought to justice. So why this is not on there, it really gets me, and because it's not on there, I can't provide you with any reference numbers if you did actually want to contact the police. I find it just really disappointing. Anyway, Lincolnshire Police can be contacted on 101 if you are in the UK, or via their online contact form if you are from elsewhere. But obviously, because I have no reference numbers, and I'm not too confident that it is being investigated. You could also get in touch with the Missing People UK charity. They can be contacted if you're from the UK on 116000. They also have an online contact form, and if you have any details pertaining to any crime that may have taken place, you can also contact Crimestoppers UK completely anonymously, either on the phone number, which I will include in the link down below, or on the online contact form as well. I would also think it's beneficial, though, if you do have any information, not just to contact one of the 3 or 4 mentioned agencies, but also to maybe contact somebody in the Missing Glyn Taylor Facebook group, which also I've linked down below, just so that family and friends can ensure that that lead is chased up by the people in a position to do so. There have also been various appeals from Glyn's friends, including Michaela, who stated, quote, "Glyn, we're thinking about you and I hope you are okay. People are looking for you. We won't be angry with you. I would have tears of joy knowing that you're okay." And she goes on to state, "I pray that he is safe. He's got to be somewhere. I wish I knew. It breaks my heart when I think about him. He was so young. It just baffles me what happened to him. We wish we knew where he was. If he's listening, just get in touch with us. You're not in trouble. We want to know. We just want to give you a hug and say everything is going to be fine." Another friend who we've mentioned previously is called Chris Bell. I believe that is Michaela's dad. He says, "Glyn, we're still hoping that you'll contact us one day, but we do respect your privacy. You're never far from our thoughts. Just let us know that you're okay." Chris also goes on to note in the Facebook group, specifically dedicated to Glyn, "Do you remember the guitar that I bought for you? I now play guitar too. Not too good, but I would dearly love for us both to play guitar together. Please let your friends know that you're okay." And I think that's really sweet. If they could get together and do a bit of a duet, that would just be absolutely fabulous. When I asked Danielle, Glyn's sister, what in particular she would say to Glyn if he was able to see or listen to this, she said, quote, "I would say, I'm your sister. I'd love to see you. It would make my whole life to see you again, and I could stop feeling sad." She emphasises that she loves him so much, she will never stop looking for him. And she further said, quote, "Even if he's made a different life, for him to see how I've developed and for me to see how he's developed, what he looks like now, that would be wonderful." And that's a really good point. You know, it's not always about the sadness. It's about to see how far you've both come in that period of time. So I really, really do hope that they both have the opportunity to share those developments with each other. Danielle's done really, really well for herself, and I think that this is a testament to how strong she has been, and that she should be really proud of herself. And I think if Glyn knew how far his little sister had come, he'd probably be really, really proud of her as well. So that was the case of Glyn Taylor. I apologise that it was a little thin on the details of the actual disappearance, but believe me, I've tried very, very hard to get the relevant information. But either way, that was one day, and since then there's been nearly 20 years. So anybody who has any information between then and now that they haven't come forward with, or even if they feel wasn't investigated fully, if they can please bring that information forward to the sources that I've linked down below and did mention in the relevant section in the video, that would be wonderful. And as always, I'm just really, really hopeful for a positive resolution in this case. Thank you for persevering, staying till the end, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.
Saw you in heaven, would it be the same if I saw